Greetings everyone, it's your Peacekeeper, and it's time to start our How to Play series on the French cruisers. And to start that off, we are going to go ahead and discuss captain skills. Now, like all my other videos on captain skills, these are more or less made as suggestions on builds that you could take. They are by no means the only builds that you can create, and by no means are you obligated to only run these builds. In fact, I would highly encourage you to experiment and see what works with you. There are some things that I'm going to be, posting or using, and they may not necessarily apply to you. And one of those big ones, and let's go ahead and get Antoine here. We'll get him pulled in, and we'll go ahead and talk about one of those. And it always comes down to these Tier 1 skills, because the Tier 1 skills are so wide and varied that there's a number of different ways you can build your captain around them. Some people will recommend taking priority target, which, tells you how many people currently have you selected as their primary target, and it gives you a number, and that's a very useful skill. It's just that at some point in time, there's going to be, this skill is going to lose some of its value for you. And what I mean by that is you'll get to a point where you're comfortable enough with your cruiser that you know when ships are shooting at you or when you're being targeted by a large number of ships. You can just basically observe it. The one thing that this would come in handy for is if you were trying to pinpoint the location of a destroyer or trying to figure out when torpedoes were launched at you. But the nice part about the French cruisers is they are all relatively quick and maneuverable enough that torpedoes usually aren't too much of an issue, depending on how you spec your captain out. Of course, preventative maintenance is another one, an expert loader, and direction center for catapult aircraft, and of course, incoming fire alert. All of those skills are very good, so if you hear me recommending one Tier 1 skill over another one for a build, don't panic. If that's the skill you want to run, run it. And like I said, these are by no means the only ways to build your ship. So with this, I've got 3 different builds that I'm going to bring up. Being as this is a cruiser, secondaries really aren't a thing, so we will not have a secondary build. The first build that I want to talk about is an anti-aircraft build, and the reason why I'm talking about an anti-aircraft build is because the French cruisers have, I don't want to call it German levels of AA. It sits between the US AA and the Japanese anti-aircraft, and it's potent. When you get spec'd into it, it can be very, very effective because there's a lot of Bofors on these ships, owing mostly due to the fact that these ships had massive refits. The real ones, anyway, that survived underwent refits in the United States for 40mm gun mounts for their medium-range anti-aircraft, and they have pretty decent dual-purpose gun mounts. So let's talk about that AA build. The first part of this build is going to be, again, those Tier 1 skills. I personally would recommend Expert Loader. The French cruisers have a tendency to sit between the Japanese and the Americans in terms of their focus, meaning they've got pretty good HE and they've got pretty good AP. They're pretty well rounded with regards to their shell choice, and as a result, being able to choose between the appropriate shell type is going to increase your damage, and that's why I personally like Expert Loader on my cruisers. Any preventative maintenance, priority target, those are both really good skills for this. Preventative maintenance if I had to choose another one, would be preventative maintenance for the ability to run main armament. You can ditch main armaments mod 1 because preventative maintenance takes over where main armaments mod 1 would be, and it allows you to take auxiliary armaments mod 1, which increases the hit point pool of all of your secondaries and anti-aircraft batteries by 100%. It doubles it. So that's a fantastic skill for that. Of course, direction center for catapult aircraft is there if you want it. From there, I'm going to recommend Expert Marksman, and while the turrets on most of the French cruisers turn pretty quick, I find myself moving too much with them, and I like having fast-turning turrets that can keep up no matter what I'm doing. So that's why I like Expert Marksman as my Tier 2 skill. From there, I would recommend going to Superintendent, and this is going to get you that extra fighter. It's going to also get you defensive fire later on, or speed boost, or hydro, depending on how you want to spec it out. Obviously, in an AA build, you're going to end up taking that defensive fire. And from there, I would go to Advanced Firing Training. And then if you really, really want to, you can either get Manual Fire Control for AA, or you can come over to Concealment Expert. Now, Concealment Expert's going to drop your detection range by 12%. Manual Fire Control for AA is going to any of your gun batteries that are over 85 millimeters that can shoot at aircraft will have their damage per second doubled when you select a group of fighters, bombers to shoot at. And that's really nice to double that damage per second of those guns. It doesn't do anything for those 40mm Bofors, but it does come in handy other times. From there, I would drop down to Basic Firing Training. By the way, Advanced Firing Training is going to push out your AA range by 20%. Basic Firing Training is going to increase the damage per second by 20%. And then from there, I would pick up Adrenaline Rush for your last 2 points. That should give you a full 19-point captain. This next build we're going to talk about, I hate to call it a survivability build because cruisers, especially, tier 8 and below where we don't have a heal on these ships, it's hard to really call it a survivability build because I guess it is. We'll just go over it and let you decide what you want. I would recommend taking preventative maintenance, but again, you can take any of those tier 1 skills that I talked about. I think they're all pretty good at this level. Obviously we don't have any need for evasive maneuver or the aircraft servicing expert, but pretty much any of the, or dogfighting expert, pretty much any of those 4 that I mentioned earlier, preventative maintenance, priority target, expert loader, and direction center for catapult aircraft. Those are going to be the tier 1s to choose. Of course, being this is survivability focused, I'm talking preventative maintenance. From there, I'm going to go to Expert Marksman for the faster turret rotation, then Superintendent for the additional heal later on. The speed boost that you do eventually get is actually quite handy as well. You can use that as part of your, ability to disengage from targets and kite them, which is super nice. And then from there, I'm going to go to Concealment Expert for the reduction in my detection range. From there, over to Advanced Firing Training, and this is going to be primarily for the anti-aircraft firing range increase. That extra 20% just helps you shoot down aircraft, which can be extremely useful if you are being chased down by an aircraft carrier. From there, I would recommend either Basics of Survivability, which is going to be a 15% reduction in the time it takes to repair an incapacitated module, extinguish a fire, or stop flooding. That's kind of handy, or we could go with Vigilance, which is going to increase the range at which we detect torpedoes by an additional 25%, and that will help you avoid getting hit by torpedoes altogether, which are your primary risk. Now, Wargaming has announced that they have plans to reduce the fire burn time on cruisers, so, maybe Vigilance is the better of those 2 options to take. From there, we've got some points left. I would recommend either High Alert, which is going to reduce the reload time of your damage control party consumable by 10%. This is the instant repair of flooding or healing, or of flooding or fire. Or Jack of all trades, which is a 5% reduction in the reload time of all of your mounted consumables. And that is going to, when you get the heal later on, it's going to come up 5% quicker. Throw the flag on there to help out as well. Or you get the heal or the speed boost. All those things can be quite useful with Jack of all trades. This last build that I'm going to talk about is, I'm going to call it a balanced build. And that's kind of the build, if you've noticed in all of these videos, I always play my quote-unquote balanced build. And there's reasons for that. I like to average out some of the strengths and bring up some of the weaknesses. So the first one that I'm picking is Expert Loader for the 50% reduction in the time it takes to switch from a loaded shell. So if I have AP loaded and I want to switch to HE, it takes me half the time to do that, whereas it would normally take you full time. From there, I'm going to go to Expert Marksman, and Expert Marksman, for that turret traverse increase, definitely handy there. Then I'm going to go to Demolition Expert to increase the chance of starting a fire by 2%. combine this with the flags and you can bump this up to, well, you can add an additional percentage point, which on these ships is only going to help you out in the long run. You can start ships on fire and then switch back to AP, which is nice. Then to Concealment Expert for the 12% reduction in your detection. From there, Superintendent for the additional consumable. And then Advanced Firing Training for the 20% increase in your anti-aircraft firing range. And then Adrenaline Rush for every 1% of my hit points I lose, I get a 0.2% reduction in the time it takes to reload any of my armament. And I feel that this build is by far the best mix of all of the strengths of the French cruisers and helps bring up some of the weaknesses. So one of the weaknesses is obviously anti-aircraft firing range. All of your AA is concentrated in 40mm Bofors, and as a result, you want to push that range out as far as you possibly can. So again, that's going to be Expert Loader, Expert Marksman, Demolition Expert, Concealment Expert, Superintendent, Advanced Firing Training, Adrenaline Rush. So that's kind of the build that I'm going to run throughout this entire series. And like I said, it is by no means a hard and fast build setup. You pick whatever works for you. Maybe you want to take my balanced build and run something else aside from Expert Marksman. Maybe you want to run, Adrenaline Rush and Last Stand, or Adrenaline Rush and High Alerts. You can pick whatever skills you want. These are just some suggestions to get you guys an idea of, thinking along the lines of what these ships kind of need. And hopefully you guys found this video useful. If you did, let me know down in the comments. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you for watching.